Here with Mark Scheeren from the Freedom Model. Mark, thank you for being on.
Thanks for having me.
We occupy a similar space, and
Yeah.
every once in a while, I like to hear where you're coming from, what you're up to, what you're thinking about. Um,
Yeah.
I think you said it before. There was an interview that you did with me, and you were charitable in saying that we're really coming from the same space in a lot of ways, but maybe slightly different framing on what we're paying attention to or who we're helping. So I'm just
Yeah.
for people who might not know, although I think a lot of people who follow us understand who the Freedom Model is. Tell us a little bit about you. You can go far as back as you'd like, how you got started, or just what your basis is
Yeah.
now.
I'll go through it quick because my story is all over YouTube and stuff like that. And people can go look that up. I actually just posted, my marketing guy was like, you got to do a big video about your past. And I'm like, oh God, do I have to
Again,
say it again?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But you know what? I thought, no, that's smart. I do have to talk about that because not everybody knows me. Right. So, yeah, I started the Freedom Model when I was 19 years old. And, I had just gotten out of treatment for 18 months. Um, I was mandated to treatment for a year because of a DUI accident. I had almost killed some people drunk driving, and my life had spiraled into a very bad place. And then I was put in treatment for a year, this intensive outpatient thing in a mental hospital, very 12-step-y, sort of confrontational, sit in the hot seat kind of nightmare that you got to go through. So I'd go there 8 hours a day, and then I had no life. But what happened, and I think the reason I tell this part of the story, because it really sets up the whole Freedom Model for the next 36 years, is um, they said, you're going to say you're an alcoholic. I said, I'm not, because I quit. I quit before they mandated me. And that this is a very important thing for the viewers, I think, to hear. Um, I had quit, and I went through withdrawal. I did that whole thing. And then it got to the point where they just worked on me and worked on me for that entire year. And I just refused to say I was an addict or an alcoholic. And it got to the end of the year. I just bided my time. And I got to the end of the year. I thought I was going to get my little slip, my pink slip to leave. And they said, oh, no, you can't leave. Not until you admit you're an alcoholic. I said, I'm not
Mm.
doing that. And then I became their project. Then they really pit everybody against me. And every month that went by, I dug in deeper and deeper. And eventually what happens is you start to second guess your own sanity. And that broke me. And at about 6 more months of that, I just fell apart. And I went from being a really pretty well-adjusted person on a good course in my life prior to the court mandate to now being completely broken, self-subscribed with an addict identity, rewriting my own history, not knowing what was real and what wasn't. And honestly, what was real is I was just a totally fucked up kid, who liked to drink and drug and got himself in a lot of trouble. And so, but it wasn't any more than that.
You were trying to
But I
grow
did.
during the time that you were in 12-step treatment, whatever it
Mhm.
was. You were trying to grow up, and they wouldn't let you
Yeah,
grow up without the obedience of saying uh, that you are
that's
this
right.
thing.
That's right. That's right. Unless I took on the identity of a broken person, I was not graduating. I was not getting my freedom back. I was not getting my license, and my life was on hold. And they held all the cards. And that's when I realized, in some circumstances, you have no rights. This
Hmm.
is real, true tyranny. It's insanity what we do to people. But they broke me, and I got out the day I graduated when I admitted. It was so ridiculous. I think back on it now, and I graduated, and I said, all right, I'm an alcoholic and addict. And they all, oh, Mark,
Here he
you know,
is. All right.
yeah, they're all hugging me. And this is 18 months of hell. And I know that these people don't care really about me at this point. They just want me out of the group. And I went to my mother's house and I put a gun in my mouth. And I was broke. I was deeply, deeply sad. The problem was I didn't know what was real or not. And
Mm.
also in this period of time, and I don't usually talk about this, I'd also in my off time gotten into a religious cult as well, because I was just searching so desperately for some identity. So my off hours from this treatment mental health place, I was going to this church because I was homeless basically. And so it was really a twisted time in my life. And that all of that just broke me. So I had this moment of clarity right before I shot myself, actually. And that was that my aunt, who was a disabled, sort of developmentally disabled lady who I cared for, and I ended up caring for her until just a couple of years ago when she died. She lived with me my whole life, but I realized she would find my headless body. And then that thought went to, I care about her. And then I realized, oh, there's something to live for. And I get teary eyed every time. And that was when the freedom model was born. That's when I realized something was deeply, deeply flawed about treatment. And I said, I'm going to find this out. And it's interesting because I'm the kind of person who, I didn't grow up with parents, and I literally grew up feral. And that's why I dug in so much. The only thing I had was me.
Yeah.
So to have that broken, to have that stolen from me in a way, screwed me up.
You know, you weren't
And
giving that up. The self perseverance is just not you're
yeah,
not interested in demeaning that value, but you still didn't
right.
know, at the end you did something that was just like you had to plug your nose and say, okay, I'm an alcoholic. And you were championed for doing something that you knew to be wrong at your core.
Yeah. And worse yet, I believed it. They broke me enough that
Mm.
I took on this. And at that point, a part of me literally died. It felt like it died. I literally, the moment I said it and I gave in to the disease, um, I was done. It broke me. And then everything shifted in my mind to sort of an insane state because everything I thought I knew about myself, I now wasn't true. Because I guess I'm an alcoholic. I guess I had to reframe everything in that lens, and it was so whacked. It was so whacked. It was so bad. So I obviously didn't kill myself. I had that moment of clarity, and I took the gun out of my mouth, and um, I said, I'm gonna find out what is wrong. Something's wrong. That's all I knew. That I knew. I could kind of hone in on this piece of truth. Something's wrong. And then I was able to remember, okay, I was better before I went to treatment. Okay. Okay. I have a starting point in my mind, a thought anchor. Let me hold on to that. And then I went to an AA meeting because I didn't know what else to do. There was no freedom model. There was no life process program. There was nothing. And boy, I didn't intend on telling the story. I guess we are letting it freewheel, aren't we?
Yeah.
And
Well,
then,
I appreciate it.
okay. All right. So that night I bumped into Jerry Brown, Michelle's father, and I'll never forget it. He did something that was extraordinary. He was doing research. He was a career researcher with General Electric Company at the Research and Development Lab, and a mathematician. He was involved in building the first computers and the first AI kind of ideas, and
Mm.
he was involved in all this really cool stuff, skunkworks stuff. Really smart guy, super smart guy. Anyway, I didn't know him. He was at the meeting, and it came around the room to him, and he said, "Hi, my name is Jerry." And then he just let there be this weird, awkward pause where he didn't say, "I'm an alcoholic." So everybody kind of turns. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but he did that to make sure everybody would listen. He was so manipulative and smart, right? So now everybody, you could hear a pin drop. They're waiting for the I'm an alcoholic. And he goes, instead of saying that, he goes, I just want you all to know that you're all just completely full of shit. It was awesome. And that was the first smile that came out because my whole life I had been going to AA since I was 5 years old with my mother. I was in therapy, and I knew they were full of shit. I knew that and that was the first truth where I was like, oh my, that was my second thought anchor in 2 days, right? The first was, I was better before this. And then he said that, and I knew it was true. Like I knew it was true. And so I said, I got to talk to that guy. I got to talk to that guy. And so after we went to coffee, as you do in AA, and he humored me. I didn't know he was doing research and calculating who was staying sober in these 10 groups and, doing all this sort of skunk works kind of stuff against AA. And it was a wild time, but and I'll end with this part because I think it is the most important part. And that is we're at the diner and I told him basically what I just told you in the audience, but in much more detail because I was utterly, completely desperate to see if I was crazy. So I laid it all out. I said to myself, I will never be dishonest to this man because I was a complete liar and just a full of shit kid. And I said, for once, I will tell the absolute truth. I will be completely vulnerable. Fuck it. I'm going to do this. And so I I blab it all out. And I go, do you think I'm crazy? Now, everything I said just prior sounded pretty crazy. Okay. I had just told him I had a gun in my mouth the day before, all this stuff. And I think, honestly, if I said that today, they would have called 911 probably or child. I mean, who knows? Something. I would be in a mental institution. But he looked at me and he goes, no, I don't think you're crazy. I think you're a 19-year-old kid that had a rough go and you're completely normal.
He had a real practical sense to him, didn't he?
Dude, I bawled like a baby. Because I had never been called normal. Never once in my life had anybody just said I was normal. I'll cry again. I gotta be careful.
You had a normal range. I mean, like you did stuff that maybe wasn't pro-social in your youth.
Yeah.
But it was given your circumstances, I suppose, and given your developmental stage. That's within a range of normal. You're not.
Yeah.
You're not insane.
Right.
Like, what you said adds up. Like you might be dumb, whatever, but you're normal.
Yeah. Yeah. I was totally normal, but nobody had ever told me that. And so I broke like a dam and just sat there and sobbed. I mean, uncontrollably sobbed. I think, and all that pain and suffering that I had through all my youth. I mean, I had a really screwed up youth came out of me in one moment. And then he's immediately told me about the research and started talking to me like I was an adult. And I was more of an adult in a lot of ways than a lot of kids because I grew up without parents. I grew up literally transient in the world and hitchhiked up and down the East Coast when I was young and did all this crazy stuff. And I said, can I be your research assistant? He said, I'd be honored if you were. We get started tomorrow. He said, show up at my house. And that was the beginning. And so it was a wild time there for 10 years. But that's my story. That's how this all began. And the freedom model, this whole thing, I intended to try and prove that AA worked. Believe it or not, even with all the bullshit I went through and how horrible it was, I didn't know anything but AA. So I was still with confirmation bias, still trying to prove that it worked. I mean, it was so insane.
To what extent it worked? Is that what you were thinking? Like, obviously this has to work to some extent.
Yeah, there has to be some truth to this whole diabolic sort of thing I just went through. It must be me. I must be screwed up. I failed the program, and yeah. And so Jer came from AA too. So, but he knew something wasn't right. He had already come to the conclusion that this whole recovery thing was suspect. So, but he didn't give that ghost up outwardly. He wanted to just meter this and make sure he wasn't screwing with the results. He was observing what was going on, and he was very good at that, keeping all his research close to the vest so that he could observe properly. And he taught me that. He taught me what an observational study was, and it ended up being 10 years long. We lived with our guests. We had no rules, and it was a madhouse, but it was awesome. It was awesome.
When did it turn from not many people, first of all, get to have sort of an epiphany and then slide right into a research project about said epiphany. That's pretty lucky.
Big time.
When did it turn from you getting your foot in the door and assisting in research to you opened a place that you had guests?
Well, it's interesting because Jer had already opened his doors, his personal doors, which is where Baldwin Research, our company, our not-for-profit name comes from. Baldwin Road in Scotia, New York, New
Mm-hmm.
York. So, um, really, it was his home because by the end of that year, we had 38 people in and out of that house. Now, the town didn't like that. The neighbors were like, what the hell is going on over there? I mean, we had parties. It was a complete madhouse. It was so insane. But, Jared said, we're going to have one idea that we're going to push, and that is that people aren't alcoholics, that doesn't really exist, that you can be fine. I mean, it was so simple. It was your normal, really. And that there was really no disease. And I don't think we knew the research yet, but we really kind of started to figure out that this was a ruse. We started to look into the history of AA and started to figure out this is really suspect, you know. Um,
So at
so
some
we
point,
had that.
people were coming. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
At some point, people were coming to Baldwin Road on that house, and
Yes.
they came because they had some kind of an issue, and they want to
Yes.
resolve it. And in that house, I mean, the one through line was you're actually not broken at all. I mean,
That's
was
right.
there anything? Was there any effort on your part in the early days to try to change the lifestyle? Say, was it a dry house, or was it or were the rules to it, or
Yeah.
was it just let it rip? Don't worry, you're not diseased.
I don't even know if at that point, it's hard to remember now because it's 36 years, all the details, but it was, you couldn't get hammered in the house, you know. That was the one thing, just because it would descend into chaos and libelous sort of situations,
Sure.
you know. It could be dangerous. So, Jared said, you know, if you're gonna spend time here, you got to do it sober, and you're not broken, and you can recover. We didn't even have language yet that was separate from AA. So we're trying to use the same language in ways and manipulate it. But the whole message was, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. And I don't think either of us really understood how powerful that was until after that year was done and we looked at the results, and 75% of the people were sober still, you know. And we were monitoring this hardcore. They didn't know they were being studied. Then we went to everybody afterwards and we said, will you sign off and be in this study? We'll give you a number. Your name won't be used. And that became the Baldwin Research Project of 1990, or sort of seminal moment where we wrote something up. And Jer was great at writing papers. In the meantime, he started to look into the state of New York and Oasis and some of the nonsense they were doing with people. And then was treatment effective? And was early AA really what they said it was? And so at the end of that first year, we lost the house because Jerry went bankrupt.
Hmm.
And in that period of time, also Michelle got her life together and became the second research assistant as well. And there were other people bouncing around, young people, older people. There's 38 of us. And basically me, Michelle, and Ryan, who came in 2000, and Steve are the four that sort of stayed through this whole big, long, giant thing called the Freedom Model. So, but when we lost the house, literally the bank came. We ran it right up on the rocks, man. The bank came. We had no place to live. Me and Jerry were out in the street. Like, they took the cars. They walked up and they're like, give us the keys to the cars.
Right. If
We
you
were
didn't sound
panicking.
like a conspiracy theorist before for just going against the grain, now you're on the street, so you're not broken.
Yeah. Yeah. This was rough, man. This is where
Yeah.
shit got rough.
Yeah. I don't mean
So,
to make light of it. It's just like
no,
how
no,
absurd can it get?
it was totally insane. This whole thing was, everybody, my family was like, what in God's name are you doing? Who is this Jerry guy? Like, what's happening? You know? And I just was so dedicated to this because you have to understand, I grew up kind of in a drug house. Like, we had no parents. So we had a house in the woods on 100 acres behind trees. And it was just a basic crack house sex fest. You know,
Mm,
that's how I grew up from 7 on, you know, and it was so bad. And so for me, the Baldwin House was an extension of how I grew up. I could handle these people. You know, I was comfortable in this environment. Actually, it was
sure.
quite nice in comparison to how I grew up, you know. So when we lost the house, we took this paper And we presented it to the local rehabs and said, let's do something. Let's institute this whole different philosophy. And we were really excited. And I remember we had our first, really new computer and printer, and we were printing them off and sending these out, certified letters to all these rehabs and to the state of New York. And the only thing we got back were legal notices, threats to our existence as researchers. And they were like, no, no, no. And all of a sudden now we're on New York State's monitor. And we were out in the street penniless. So I remember Michelle gave us her car at the time, and one of the kids' parents gave us a place to stay in their basement. So me and Jared lived in that basement for a year, as we tried to sort of disseminate this information old fashioned. There's no internet, no cell phones even at this point. We're just driving around with an atlas in the car, just dropping packages off and hoping somebody cared, and nobody did. And that was probably one of the toughest years of my life, realizing that I just spent 2 years of my life, and now we're poorer than we ate 39-cent cans of Price Chopper vegetable soup every day. I can't eat vegetable soup to this day because of it. I really can't. It's disgusting to me, because we were just so broke. And so I went back to the farm, lived on the farm for a little while, made some money, bought a truck, and that became our truck. And then we got the retreat, our first retreat in Hageman, New York, and had all the legal battles with the state, beat the state, won those, got grandfathered in as a program in the state of New York. And we coexist with Oasis now. I don't have an axe to grind with them. They're good people, whatever. They're doing their thing. We do ours. I don't agree with what they're doing, but they don't agree with what I'm doing. So I guess
you're not gonna work together anytime soon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not happening. But yeah, and so that was, we got our first retreat. We had no money, and we showed up at this lady's house and said, would you let us stay here for 8 months rent free? We'll build the place for you. She had it on the market. It was this old adult rest home. And I couldn't believe it. We just walked up to her. We saw it in like a penny saver. We drove out, and she looked at us, she goes, I was just, mowing around St. Mary. She had a little statue of St. Mary. And she asked, are you Catholic? I said, yeah. We just prayed to St. Jude, patron saint of hopeless cases. And she goes, I prayed to St. Jude this morning. You can have the house for 8 months.
Wow.
I'll give you a chance.
Wow.
And so and we didn't even know where the house was. I remember we pulled into a Stewart shop and said, where is this place? And they said, you're right. It's literally 100 feet behind the store here. So that's how we got our first retreat, free. And we walked in just on faith. And I couldn't believe Jer asked her the balls he had. He was just like, let us have free. I said, yeah. I said, where'd you come up with 8 months? He goes, I don't know. I just said it on the fly. I don't know. And so we moved in that night, and that was the beginning of really the hardest decade of the process. That's where we walked out of AA.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we exploded and got on the internet. We were the first program on the internet ever, pre-Google. Everybody that I talked to at that time was like, oh, this internet thing's a fad. And I said, I don't think so, man. I'm going to build a website. I had no idea what I was doing. And in the first month, our houses were full. And literally in less than 30 days, I had to get cars going to the airport every day, and we're picking people up from all over the world. I was like, what is happening? And so that happened. Yeah. Then I had to build retreats.
I mean, I know since then you kind of developed a good system for having people live in a home for some extended period of time, and being able to teach your model to the point that, I don't know, a decade ago was the first time we talked, maybe, and you still had the retreat open, and you were talking about it not as a rehab, like it kind of did the thing that the people like about rehab, like you're getting away and doing something, but then you added the and something to it. It's like we're gonna do some education. So we're not fixing you because you're not broken. We don't have all these doctors on to try to over medicate you or something. We're going to
Right.
give some education about how you might live your life. And so what did anything change? And of course, now we could talk about this, but this in this age, it's like you actually reach more people doing things remotely to an extent than you can opening up your home to people. But did you learn anything between the time you first opened and when you were providing a pretty good sequence of educational programming inside of the home? Um,
Yeah.
any new
Yeah.
beliefs or anything sharper that
Well,
you got out of?
yeah, there's a line that me and Steve worked on, and that is that if you think getting over addiction is hard, the fact that you think it's hard is the problem. And so I think that when you dispel all the mythology, it's not hard anymore. You can just choose, like you could choose to drink this cup of coffee or not. And that's a remarkable freedom. But to get there, I think what I learned in the retreat specifically was it was a much greater challenge in the retreat because the implication was just by the person being there that you needed to be there, that
Hmm,
it was harder, that there had to be a financial and sort of time investment in your recovery.
right.
And boy, once you even have that implication because of our cultural bias for that model, you cause yourself an uphill battle that is totally unnecessary. I can do something in 3 sessions with somebody who's a hardcore user and been in AA for 30 years and been to 10 rehabs, and I can turn them around. Now, I can't. I don't have that. I'm not magic. But with the right information and the right model of how to educate and what to ask and all of that, which I'll talk about in a second, it's remarkably efficient. It's remarkably efficient. And so we've figured out a lot of these things. Now, this is in the last 7 years that we let go of the retreats for the benefit of the audience, and we just do coaching. But what I want to say is Jerry was so far ahead of the curve because he created the first actual coaching model for addiction help in the world at the Baldwin House. And I remember, and it's so crazy to me. He was so far ahead. It was called the Educational Initiative. And he would go into companies, and this was something he was selling. He would go into companies and and this was, go into human resource department and then talk to employees. And we were just trying to figure out how we could disseminate the information, right? But it was all about educating. There was no therapy. There was no treatment. And that's how we ended up winning our lawsuit with the state was they said, you can't say your treatment. I said, I don't want to say I'm treatment. We
Yeah, we're
agree.
not. Right.
We're not. We don't treat anyone. We don't do detox. We don't medicate. We don't do any of that. So, so it was, he was so far ahead. But what was interesting is because that model was mixed with AA, we got sucked into the treatment trap and we
Hmm,
got sucked into building this sort of hybrid, this implied hybrid model of rehab that we were saying it wasn't rehab because it wasn't, because the model was really education inside a building. But because it was shelled in a building with a residential model, do you see the confusion?
of course.
So now you got these two paradigms that are swimming with each other, and it made for us for a lot of pain. It was a 20-year painful experience to say, no, with every single student, no, we're not a rehab. Well, you kind of are. I'm kind of at a rehab. No, you're not. But they were. They were. I couldn't get around it. But in my mind, I saw the freedom model. I was there. Jerry saw it all the way at the Baldwin House, but we got sucked into this AA thing. Now, I think it's important that we did, though, because we both came from there. It was imperative for us to sink into that muck, into that swamp, and sort out the swamp, or else the freedom model wouldn't be what it is today.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. We're
So,
still
so
at
that's
the life process program. It's not about me, so this is not very long on this, but we had Stanton Peele, his Dr. Stanton Peele created this
he's
model.
awesome.
Yeah, you know him. He created this model, and I know you knew him from his legal battles with his own rehab
Oh
facility.
yeah, yeah, he's a
He
ballsy
he
dude.
he'll praise you forever for that. But
Yeah,
um, and then he took that model, which did come from a rehab facility, and like he was already reducing dissonance for himself. Then he's like, "What the hell am I doing in rehab? What the hell am I doing in rehab? What the hell am I doing?" But it's the only game in town, so I have to do it. And then he took the model, and he's like, "All right, let's pull the weeds of rehab, and let's just make it a nice, clean model." And still to this day, our online model where people interface with us, now I'm still pulling out weeds of what you called kind of hybridized junk
yes,
because you were just so woven into it. Um,
yeah,
the one avenue where we're safe is that we work with these I don't know if I even want to call it harm reduction communities, but it's what they call themselves. Places in inner cities that they're trying to help people who are living on the streets develop better habits in their lives. So I guess that's harm
mhm,
reduction, and it's
yeah,
like how can I help you get a job and how can I help you pay the bills and how can I help you balance a checkbook and how all of the things that go into it. We actually slot really well into those communities because we have a framework that looks like treatment. But in zero times when we're working in those communities do they think of us as treatment. It's just the people who are granting them money, they think it looks enough like it that it works. And so I don't know, maybe we found an avenue there where we get to be as practical as we possibly want to be. We don't ever have to use the word addiction or drug or anything while we're asking people
right,
questions. Just how do you live a better life? Um,
yeah,
but other than that, it's nearly impossible unless you're just as rigorous as you talked about being and on the nose about what your message is and not willing to take money from the devil if he offers it to
yeah,
you.
yes,
It's almost impossible not to be interwoven with some sort of bullshit somewhere.
yeah. It's. I had to. It was really 7 years ago when we published the book, and me, Steve, and Michelle and Ryan looked at each other, and I said, "Listen, I'm going to be unequivocal, and we're going to be poor for a while. I've done this before. I started with nothing, and then we were $10 million and helping people all over the world, but it wasn't right. It was still the best thing in town. I felt at the time it was the best we knew how to do, but I was willing to shut all that down
You had
because
a life mission.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I want to replace AA with something that actually helps people, not lead them down a path where they have a gun in their mouth at the end
Mm.
feeling broken. That's just unnecessary, wrong, and I know the difference. So I said, we're going to be unequivocal about this. We're not going to we're going to do whatever it takes to have our language be pure and do our own thing. And I said, please understand, this is like trying to sell an iPod in a CD world, man, because people aren't going to get it at first. So it's going to take a good 5 to 6 years of being really poor and working our asses off 12 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week again. Are you guys with me? And they said, yeah. And that's what it took. We sold our houses. We sold everything we owned. I own nothing. I'm just now making a paycheck finally again. We all are, which is nice. But it was a wicked go, man. It was a wicked go. But you know what? I'm beholden to nobody. I'm telling the truth in its most stark, clear, concise way that
Hmm.
I know. I mean, you're always learning.
It's a breath of fresh air, isn't it?
Yeah. Tell me about this inner city thing. That's cool. That's a cool thing to me because that's by far the hardest demographic to work with,
Yeah.
by far.
Yeah. Well, it was first of all, it's like you do this in business. I know you're familiar with something like this. A group in Seattle, and I don't even I'm going to put my foot in my mouth, I think, but they got a hold of us knowing Stanton's work and asked, "Do you guys do anything? Do you have a model for training our coaches and our clinicians?" And we didn't, but we all said, "Yeah, yeah, we got a model for that." And like, all right, well, could you propose it to us in a month? I think we might have funding for it. So we scrambled and made a model for it. So we
Yeah.
have this now training model that says for clinicians working in a group like that that's so practical. Like everything is about how people can pick themselves up and get one foot in front of the other, and how you can use the services the city's providing, but then lose the services because you're your own person.
Right,
That
right.
that
Get on with
that
it.
that, that speak to it. That speaks to us. I mean, and any organization could say that, and a lot of times it doesn't work that way. But
Yeah,
so
that's true.
our model of was really just like you were saying, more than interacting with clients. It was saying to clinicians, "You guys kind of know this stuff, but let's get practical, okay? So you don't have to fix anybody. Nobody that you're working with is broken. You will have to try to understand where they're coming from, and you'll have to probably help them um, um, adjust their own biases, and but you'll have to give them the power to do it on their own. And here's a framework for that. And here's some questions that you can ask, and here's module 1 through 8 about just different dimensions of life that they might be, going through or thinking about. And so that worked pretty well, and they liked it. And that same group hired us back again. So all of a sudden, we have two organizations in Seattle that work in this field that we were able to say, "Yeah, we do this thing now." We business to business sort of
Yes.
marketing, saying we are a training program. And so
Well, it's
that is probably more our bread and butter than is direct client services now. And it actually feels much more. I don't want to. The difference isn't ethical. Everything's ethical, but it's feels stupid word. But it feels much more. I don't know what you were just talking about, like a breath of fresh air. Like we're saying exactly what's true, because it's almost like the
yeah,
training program is almost like there's a legacy associated with the model we've built, and so we want to
yeah.
make sure that that's pure, because it will somewhere down the line probably become unpure, but we want to make sure that the way we train it is pure, and then so that feels really good.
Well, it's really cool because for the benefit of the people that are watching or listening, our models, your the name of yours is very akin to what you do. It is a life process. The freedom model is not that. It
Hmm.
is debunking addiction mythology and then sweeping away so that you can make a choice about drinking and drugging in some capacity that makes more sense for you. Um, and we don't really get into the life skills. I do a little piece that I call life movements when I'm coaching somebody as a launch piece. But then we let go, So we're not really involved in the life process. What we do is really centered on the substance. Or now with sex addiction, quote unquote. I'm going to use the word addiction throughout this just for ease of talking,
Yep.
but we have completely different language that we use. But porn and sex addiction. I wrote a book, I wrote an entire program, and that has taken off like gangbusters. I mean, we're really successful with these young men. It's
Hmm.
predominantly young men, which is very exciting because turning people around in a very fast fashion effectively is exciting. Um, but but it's interesting because what you're dealing with, we're both dealing with social problems, but you're dealing with them in a different way than I am. But it's going to have the same effect, you know? And that's really cool. So, one of the things that my next project is actually, I launch it tomorrow. I launch the meetings, I have the outline built. We're going to be building a coaching training program worldwide where people can learn the freedom model and coach it,
Hmm.
the way I
Good.
teach it, the way Michelle teaches it. Yeah, and 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 let them be independent, let them coach as they want, but we will train them. I mean, we'll obviously do background checks and vet people because they're going to be on our directory, our coaching directory. But I tell everybody out there, hey, if you want to be a freedom model coach, you're going to have an opportunity to do so.
That's great.
And yeah, yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. I'm excited to bring it to the world. We're there. We're at that point where we can do it.
Do you have
And
worries about I just mentioned one. Like there's always the fear. I talk to I always mix the two names up. Carol Dweck. She's the one who wrote Mindset.
yes,
And she
yes,
said, "Well, I think I have a good idea about growth mindset. My worry is this is going to infiltrate like businesses and schools, and people are going to use the term, have the banner growth mindset of some stupid thing they're doing that has nothing to do with actually what I'm saying growth mindset is. And now I'm going to be credited with this thing that doesn't work, and what she predicted that to a T. I mean, that definitely happens now. That's like growth mindset is that buzzword that you use if you want to pretend you're doing something. Do you worry that will happen with the freedom model, or that could happen?
I always worry about that. But here's the thing. I think because it's written on paper, if it gets squirrely, humans are pretty good at seeing when things go awry and then going back to the book. And I can only do what I can do. And as far as I'm concerned, anything is better than telling people they have a chronic progressive brain disease that they don't have.
Right.
I mean, if I can just get that piece gone, we will save millions of lives. That's it. So my goalpost is fairly low, but some people say that sounds like it's daunting, but it's not to me. It's not. I mean, we do it in 2 chapters. It's such a simple thing to debunk. It's ridiculous, So all I got to do is teach 1,000 coaches that, and they're going to touch a bunch of people. And here's what I also know. That if people understand, and the crowning achievement of what I've done for me was discovering something that is really not a discovery at all. And that is the positive drive principle. And that is that all people always are moving in a direction of what they believe benefits them in real time. Always. You can't do something you don't want to do. Okay. And that principle, if you understand it, if I can get my student to understand that, and I have techniques to do that, it blows their mind, because now they become completely aware that they're in control of everything in their sphere of it, So it's for me, it's those 2 things that I hone in on, because if I get them to understand they're not diseased, not broken, and I get them to understand that they have a positive drive that is innate and there's nothing they can do about it. They can't do something that is against what they believe is beneficial to them.
In some way. In some way. Right. Can know it's almost like opposite of don't think about a white elephant. It's like try to do something that you don't want to do.
Yes, I use that thought experiment. I go literally try to pick up this. The very first lesson Jerry did with me, the very first morning, I showed up at his house, this scared kid, and he goes, "Okay, I have a lesson for you." I said, "Okay." What am I doing? I was all excited. He's like, "You're going to spend 24 hours trying to do something that you can't think of." I go, "What?" He goes, "You're going to spend 24 hours. He goes, "For example, I want you to pick up this cup of coffee." He had a cup of coffee on his desk. "But I want you to not think about doing it first, but pick it up." And I go, "I can't." He goes, "You have to. That's your first assignment." So I'm like, fuck, man. I now I'm totally freaking out. So that's it. That's what he told me. And then he left the room. And he's like, you put your bags upstairs. You can stay upstairs, and that's your assignment. So I come back down the next day, totally sweating it. And I said, "Jer," I literally sat around. And I was like, "Okay." I'd have a pen on the table. And I'd be like, "All right, don't think about it." And I'm like, "This is stupid. I can't move it without like, telekinesis. I mean, what is he trying to do? What is this trick?" So I get back with him and I said, "It can't be done." And he goes, "You have succeeded in the lesson." That's so right. You've always been in control.
Yeah, right. At the very least, no matter what, there is no puppet master.
That's right.
Right. And
massive empowering, just a simple thing. And that led to many things that I later understood were important.
So for us, that concept lends itself to, well, at first there could be disagreement, or there's always the annoyingness of saying, I wanted to do it for the reasons I wanted to do it, and then there are other things that compete against that I'm not getting because I wanted to do this more. But that all comes down to, but you can those are all, you could put those all on a platter and choose all of them. You can put them together in any order you want to. That like
That's right.
that it debunks the idea that something is controlling you and forcing you to
That's
do
right.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you get rid of shame and guilt and morality. We have to work on those constructs. We sort of put those on a shelf. There's all these little techniques that I've learned from doing it, now 27,000 times. I've had 27,000 students. And when you do that, you learn a lot. And um, the one thing I can say is I commend you guys. I don't work well in any governmental school structure or societal structures. And that's just me. So the model tends to be totally individual centered
Hmm.
because I am like, I can't do it, man. You know? So you guys, that's such a ballsy, tough thing to me I can't imagine doing it.
Yeah, you have to have a different read on yourself within an organizational structure than you do when you get to do what you know is right with a client who maybe also will believe that's right and that will help them. Like with an
Yeah.
organizational structure, you have to be in there, be rogue, be like have a smile, but be disagreeable all the time, and and hope that you're doing something in a systematic way that is engaging people and changing their mindset enough that it could make a way. And then you're going to die before that's solved as a system. So it is a
Yeah.
totally different way of thinking about things.
Yeah. Yeah. You're in that sort of hive mentality and politics are involved and funding is involved. And I'm like, damn, dude. I've tried to plug in the freedom model, but it just doesn't lend itself to that. It just doesn't. As a model, it's way too freewheeling and individual centered, the way it's written, all of it. And it scares the shit out of anybody that is structure oriented. There are people
Mhm.
that really live in that, whether it's their job or whatever, they live in structures. And the freedom model just kind of shakes all that around a little bit too much for that.
What's an
It doesn't
example of
work well
that?
in.
I mean, you have maybe that's a hard question because there are 1,000. So, like, how do you
No,
think of one?
no. Let's say that here's a great example: a university. You would think that
Oh,
the head of a major university that deals with the psychology department would look at that and say, wow, that's really at least interesting.
right. Let's think critically about it.
Yeah, let's use it in the curriculum. I've sent it to all kinds of universities
Hmm.
and it's well cited. I mean, there's no bullshit in that book. There is no bullshit. There's no wild claims. And it took us a long time to write the damn thing. And, and they know it. I send it, I set up the meeting, I talk to them and they go, yeah, 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 it's great. It's great. Thanks, Mark. And I say, we going to do something? It's a little too far.
Maybe next semester. Yeah, right.
It's a little too far because literally it, there would be no psychology department. Half of what they say would go away. And the funding for that would literally need to be just not needed, because
Yeah.
when you start to understand human behavior for what it really is, all the stuff that's wrapped around it in what we do in Western society just isn't necessary anymore. You don't have to diagnose a bunch of people with a bunch of stuff. So, yeah, they're just not, those systems are not willing to let go.
Yeah.
And it's based on money.
Anytime we're working with, like, I lectured at a university at Queen's University in Belfast, and it's always out of the country. There's always some
Yes.
slightly more practical Western country, but not totally. But it's
Yeah.
practical enough that they'll
Yep.
invite you to speak so that their students can harangue you or have a civil discussion with you, I guess. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you're invited in as, well, here's what some ridiculous guy thinks. So what do you all think? Let's talk about it. While you're sitting there and defending. Um,
I
so
think there's a,
uh,
a value to socialism with that. I think that it lends, I'm not a socialist by any stretch, obviously, the freedom model, right? But, but when it comes to a system where you're allowed to just talk for the sake of talking and your funding is about talking and you don't necessarily have to have results, right? To keep the funding flowing. In
Right.
America, it's very, it may be governmental and a little bit socialist, but it's capitalist ties, man,
Right. Right.
and so they don't want none of this breaking down any of the money. But like the freedom model does work better, like you were just explaining, and I imagine the life process program would as well. In a place like Australia, we have a huge
Yep.
following, and the UK, huge following. Those two places, Germany too, but the UK and Australia, they love us. Queensland, they love us, uh, and and the government has had more of an open thought about it than the West. Forget it. I mean, in America,
Hmm.
I've almost given up.
I know, and you
With
you almost
individuals.
want to think like free speech does something. You almost want to think that people thrive in discourse when they're learning and challenge beliefs. It's not really how that works in psychology. Yeah,
No.
or in a lot of respects. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a religion. It's a religion like any other, and it's a religion tied to money, just like the Catholic Church is and all the big, great institutions. It really is about the money and influence and things like that. And when you shake that, it just doesn't work. Um, so yeah, that's interesting stuff. So where do you think you're headed with the life process program? Where would you like to see it go?
There was a lot of stuff that happened in the school system where I work. I don't some people watching might not know that I also work in a school. And man, working hard to develop systems in the school that are down to earth, plain and simple, like let's let kids be kids kind of a thing.
Yeah, very
Um,
cool.
tough to do.
Yep.
And when things got tough in my school system, and then we had a lot of budget stuff going on, and there were people not sure if they were going to have jobs. I have always wanted to start a school um, with the spirit of everything I just said. In Vermont, there's been a moratorium on starting new schools. For
I
the
didn't know
very
that.
for the very same reason as there has been difficulties with budgets. It's all, all about reallocating money from
Mm,
more affluent districts, across the state, which is noble on its face, but it's almost like they think the schools that have populations of affluence are like sitting in a penthouse somewhere with all of the things to share, and it's not the case. So every school in Vermont has had these major cuts with no idea about how to change the philosophy to adapt to all the cuts. And I
right.
think that when that came into being, the laws that ensured that would happen, the idea was, well, we hope that with everything that's going to change, all of the richest students, the rich white students, don't just go into hiding in a private school somewhere because they can
Mm,
afford it, and then we're left
right.
with public schools are simply for the poor.
Right.
So I understand why, but how frustrating. So I don't know when that opens up. I mean, I'm pretty young and I still have time to think about starting a school. I don't have to do it in this state and so on. But I can imagine our life process program transferring to kids. It's just like we don't have to talk about addiction. We can just talk about, yeah. If you had to, you might say like how to addiction proof your this next generation, how to make sure that they're growing up and they're thinking for themselves and they're developing skills and being pro-social. So I'd like to see it go in that direction, which we haven't really started doing yet, but I sure have ideas about it. And I'd like to see us doing more. I'd like to see us continue working one-on-one with clients because it's almost like we're not treatment, but if you were going to call us that, we'd be we're like the treatment place for people who don't like treatment. You know what I mean?
I know.
And
I know. You don't want to go down there.
right, right,
I
right,
get
right.
that. You don't want to go down there.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But
we don't
yeah.
we don't coin it ourselves. It's just like, but people come to us. It's like, well, I hate the idea of rehab. I hate 12
Yeah.
steps, and so I
Yeah.
found you
Oh
guys.
yeah.
What's up? And
Yeah.
I imagine that you get clientele,
Oh,
and I'd like to
tons. Yeah.
continue teaching people how to teach it, so that in a back-ended way, we're talking to clinicians who have already been educated. But man, I'm sure you've talked to 100 more clinicians who say, okay, I've got this master's degree and license now. How come all the shit that I have to do and the paperwork and the weird stuff I have to do seems like I'm doing something ethically wrong, or that I can't
Yeah.
fulfill my own potential as a person who just studied all
Oh,
of
yeah.
this and working with human beings? So I'd like to
Yeah.
have some influence on people being able to see what control they have to be good clinicians or just good helpers along with people.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You talked about starting a school. I don't know if you know this, but we built a school too. And for
Mm-mm.
10 years, a part of Hageman was the original retreat was the Jude Thaddeus Academy. And we had all these young people come from all over the place. And in those days, because we sort of we had part of the research with an observational study in that first 10 years was we had no length of stay. So if we had money and you were a kid and your parents didn't want you, we took you in. We even adopted people. Um, I got brothers and sisters that I didn't intend. I mean, literally, people would drop off their kids and not take them back,
Wow.
and they were suddenly my brother or my kid. And Jerry has other kids that are Browns that exist in this world now because of that.
How
So we
old
had
were
to do
they? What was the age range
uh,
of kids?
10 to 14.
People aren't dropping off infants at your door. It's almost like
No,
you're a
no,
more
they,
trustworthy school for
yeah.
troubled teens or something.
Well, we didn't have the school yet. That started happening just because we were helping people. And I was so young that I think we would talk at schools and then that would end up, I would talk to parents and then all of a sudden they would show up at the retreat and then we would have an interview and I'd show an interest in their kid. And they obviously had no interest in their kid. And I knew something about being a feral kid that there was an instant attraction there that
Right.
you just simply understood each other quickly.
Mm.
And it didn't, frankly, it didn't scare me because I lived in this transient house with 11 siblings, biologic siblings, you know? So, so they would just not come to get their kids. That happened twice. And then there were
Jeez.
other kids that stayed for like a year, some 2 years. And they became staples in in the house. So the upstairs we had, and then we created an actual school and it was called the Jude Thaddeus School. Taught him to read, write, all that kind of stuff. It was crazy. The whole thing was nuts. But but I just let the research happen, and I let the people teach me, and it was totally insane, but it was smart. I mean, they taught me what I needed to know. They taught me how to be a researcher. The people taught me if I would say something that was just simply not true, but I thought it was true. You say that enough time, people will look at you and say, that's bullshit, dude. You know, and I couldn't leave at the end of the day, right? Like I had to live with my mistake.
And sit with
So
that.
yeah, dude. And every day the guy's like, you're full of shit, buddy. You know, and you're like, and then that can turn into a mutinous situation.
Sure.
And now I'm backpedaling. Now I'm doing real research to see if what I'm saying is actually true. And that's how I became a researcher. And I don't know anybody else that did it that way. I really did. Just Jer and me and Michelle. Michelle too. She went through the ringer. And Steve Slate, of course, us. You know, we were all these sort of lost kids, but we were willing to stick it out. So, but the school thing was crazy. But it was fun. It was really neat, you know. And
Something I thought about while you were just talking. I mean, and this might be like apropos of nothing, depending on where your mind wanders to. What what protects you? What protects your model and your belief system in what you teach from being either a limited slice of information that people can cling to, or um, the cultish in its own right. So like there's something there's something quite definitive about the way you put things in your book, and
yes,
it is true. I don't have There's nothing in your book that I would say no, because it's like you say, you're not trying to be profound in some sense. You're just trying to say, let's just like anchor ourselves to this bedrock truth and not go away from it too far. And let's slide on that. That's how I read the book. So
well,
there's something good about the orderliness and the simplicity even
Yeah.
though it took like, how about 450, 500 pages to write the
Yeah.
book and debunk things. And then on the other hand, we're in the same business of debunking just bad beliefs in the life
Yeah.
process program. But there's something chaotic a little bit about saying everyone who comes to us is going to have a different set of values and way that they want to live their life. There are definitely more and less pro-social values, and you can almost say that with as like on a fact basis, but only you know what makes you tick. So let's go through like the life space, and you create your own life, and you tell us why that's more or less of an addictive one or a more or less hopeful one. So for us, it's like we the idea itself is protected because it's grounded in truth, but it's protected from being cultish to an extent because there's no single text or dogma. There's no dogma to it, so you can't accuse us of like we brainwashed somebody. Um,
Yeah.
what is it about your model and
That
so
protects us
concretely
from that.
put that yeah that you feel like philosophically protects you from that?
Yeah, philosophically, it protects us through the three attributes that we describe in the three different chapters. And that's the positive drive principle, free will, and autonomy. So, one of the things that was really painful in those formative years was it was culty because we were part of AA, not part of AA. We were part of a cult,
That's
after all.
why I asked. You said that you were sort of like feeling that way, and then you grew out of that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we started in a very intense cult atmosphere. When me and Jerry met, we were deeply embedded in AA. He had some new ideas. Then we fell into the swamp of the cult of Alcoholics Anonymous, which it is definitively a cult. It is. And I've done a ton of podcasts on it, and you can look those up. But I'm saying that to the audience.
mhm.
But so it was very painful for me to go through that, knowing, kind of stepping outside myself and going, wait a minute, I'm teaching the same bullshit that put a gun in my mouth. And then I'd teach something else that would pull me out of that. And then I would learn. Then I would get sucked into some other piece of the cult that was just embedded into me since I was born. I was born in the cult of Alcoholics Anonymous with my mother and siblings. Half my family went to rehabs and TCs. So I didn't know any better. So I have a real radar for that shit now, having lived it, breathed it, taught it. That first 10 years, for 8 of them, I taught the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous in a way while simultaneously teaching something that
Hmm.
was its opposite. You want to talk
Moving
about
away from
fucking
it,
confused, right? I
right?
could recite the entire first 164 pages of the book Alcoholics Anonymous sight unseen. And somebody put me to a test. I should have recorded it, but in those days you didn't have phones and stuff. And they were like, you can't do that. And I go, watch me. That's how much I taught it.
Hmm.
So I was in this really confused state. That's when I say we were in the swamp, we were wallowing in this painful place for a decade or more. So when I popped out of that, sort of one day, and I can remember it was Christmas of like 2099 or 2000. I said, we're not doing meetings anymore. Everybody freaked out. Like I had a community at that point. We owned apartment buildings filled with people. It was like rehab central without the rehab. And I said, we're cutting the tie today. We're never going to another meeting. We're getting rid of this thing. We built the fellowship. I had recreated AA and it was insane, but it all collapsed in one day. In one day, I just let it all collapse. And it was anarchy because I had created a model of dependence,
Right,
and
right.
it made me sick, but I couldn't see it. You understand? It was like it was something that I had to step out finally. And the irony was, and I'm going to answer your question, but
No,
it
you're
needs
getting there.
this
I hear
context.
you getting there. Yeah.
I got an offer to have this really beautiful palace in Mexico to start. So I was either going to do it there or Wells. So I flew down to Mexico. Me and Jer flew down there. We put the deal together in this palace. I mean, it's literally a palace. and ended up on the last day, the investors pulled out and it was to our benefit. But in doing that, I realized I couldn't have all these apartment buildings. I couldn't have, it just didn't, it wasn't conducive to this. And that gave me this weird week where I was outside the bubble of this nightmare that I was creating. Right. And I was like, oh my God, all I have to do is stop that part. And I have like 90% the right thing right here. Oh my God, it's the 10% of this bullshit I'm hanging on to that's an anchor and keeping me tethered to this swamp. So I just snipped it. I got back and I said, Jared, we got to do this. And me and Michelle, we all agreed. We killed the fellowship. We killed the meetings. I was like, we're selling the apartments. And that was really when I started to like turn my head. And then I was like, okay, what have we learned? And then it hit me. It's about just letting people be. And then I was like, what does that mean? What does letting people be mean? And then I remembered, oh my God, that's the educational initiative. That's the coaching model. There was no name for it because coaching didn't exist in the addiction world. So I was like, it's the educational initiative. Jerry was right in the beginning. The first week I knew him, he was right. We went into the swamp, all this bullshit. Now, I was glad I did it though, because I lived through and it allowed me to help people. Now I can reach into the swamp and say, oh, I know where you are. I know where you are. Here, come here. Let me help you out.
So now, you teach. So now at that point, you can say, I teach ideas. I teach things. I teach something that's well researched that can translate to skills, which could be generalizable, but they're yours. You do with them what you want. You've learned something. And how you go do with it what you want. So it would be hard to argue with you, given that your whole model is about autonomy.
That's right. That's right.
That you're trying to have somebody dependent on you. It's almost like that would be, you're failing if someone's dependent on you. That's because right. They're not exercising full autonomy.
100%. That's why I will not do more than 3 sessions with somebody. Will not do it almost as a rule. I'll do it once in a while when somebody really has a hard time. But I have so many tools built that are self-teaching now, the video courses, we have a massive body of video work that is behind a paywall, huge body of work now. And I can literally say, you need that component, that component, that component. And it's me and Michelle teaching you. But then you got to just go live your life, man. You have autonomy, you have free will, and you have a positive drive that's pushing you along. And there's nothing you can do about it. But what you need to do is learn to be more discerning. Try not to get looped into shit like this again. You've lived through it like I did. It makes you a stronger, smarter person. You'll see through the ruse of advertising. You'll see through the ruse of cartel marketing and big pharma and government and all this kind of stuff that's constantly playing to you. And now you can be an individual that can say, no, I get that. I see that. I see that bullshit right there. I see that because I lived through one of the hardest cults in the world, AA. And treatment almost killed me. And boy, you get somebody to understand that. So really I'd say, I've told you this before, 80% of the freedom model is debunking lies. So that's the sort of sterile thing. You could say it's dogmatic, but dogmatic in a good way, because all I'm doing is showing you the research that you were lied to here, 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 and here. Do with that what you want. I don't care. Drink your brains out. Believe the cartel that tells you that heroin is the best thing for your anxiety. I don't give a fuck.
Right. Something fundamentally true is if you want to be successful in whatever, however you define that, you have to have some sort of self-efficacy, self-belief. And so I guess but your 80% is allowing people to do that. And just sort of saying, please don't let someone convince you that you don't have a self that you can propel the way that you'd like to. Because if you do that, then you're kind of fucked, right?
Yes. Yes. So we take this one area, it's very narrow area, which is people who have been screwed over by the treatment industry or those that are dabbling and about to fall into it. I think we deal with a lot more of those now because we have a much wider net. But society has already impregnated their mind with ideas that are completely false. Oh, maybe I have a brain disease, maybe I have an addictive personality. I have an addictive personality and I'm in denial, And when I hear that, I say, how many treatment centers have been? Oh, I haven't been to treatment. And I go, okay, So I consider that like a low grade educational process to undo some of this stuff. And then they go, oh yeah, yeah. So we're sweeping the deck of mythology, but what you place on the deck next, I have no hand in.
Right. Right.
None. And that's where we really harp on autonomy, free will, and we call it life movements, not life process, but life movements, where we talk about happiness and moving on. And we might have a conversation about that. But it's surprising that when you clear the deck with this demographic, because the deck was cluttered and was dominating 90% of their time, when you clear it, they have 90% free runway. So I say you have a window of opportunity to really blossom right now, like I did. And then I tell my story and I say, my story's mine. So that would be the last session would be, now it's your turn. You really can be okay. You really can move on with your life. And there's nothing wrong with you. No matter how scared you are right now, it's okay. Being scared is normal too. And then they leave. And I say, just text me in 6 months and let me know how you're doing. That's for me, because I want to hear how you're doing. It's not for you. And I'm being selfish. I want to hear that I did something of value. Keeps me going. And they do. They text me. It's awesome.
That's great. What if I'm somebody seeking help or education and I want to access the freedom model? What can I expect? Where do I start, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So I would tell people there's so many free resources, and all my marketers and everybody that's involved in the business side of things are like, Jesus, Mark, we just stop with the free thing. But I would go to our YouTube channel. I would go to the Addiction Solution podcast. We have 260 episodes there. That's free. I would do our master class, which if you go on the coaching page is all the way at the bottom. That's free. It's a 1 hour masterclass where I demonstrate the research that nobody is ever out of control, because a lot of people feel like they're out of control. That's a fundamental. You get over that piece for free, and boy, your life can take off. And go to our website, thefreedommodel.org. Now, if you're in deep, I want to say this, and I want to be really clear about this part because you're giving me the opportunity. If you're in deep and you're scared to death that you're going to have to go to another treatment center, and you've been to 5 or 2 or 3 or 1, and your life is spiraling into horrible withdrawal and this whole nightmare of fentanyl, maybe, or whatever it might be, drinking in hotels for 5-day benders and crack house with hookers, whatever is your thing that is destroying your life. If you're in that pool, you can always come and meet with me and Michelle for 2 days. And that's what we call CASP. That's where people come for 2 days. And we only do this once a month with one person. But I say that I save that for the person that you feel like you're going to die. That's me, the guy like me. So I say that because I don't want you to die. I want you to know that we can literally sit in this studio with you, shut the lights down, and just go through the whole course in 2 days. So some people need that, but I only do that once a month.
So you have the book, you have podcasts. I mean, you have a ton of free resources. You have a video that on your website that's free. You've all written articles. So and those
workshops too.
Those are useful. And free workshops. Is that what you just said?
We have live workshops. They're low cost. It's like $200, $189. Really intense, life changing. We have also our online program that has over 200 video tutorials now, and we add them bi-weekly. So every time we learn some new piece of research, we add it in. So you have this, we call it the encyclopedia of the freedom model. So that's very affordable. And you can have a membership to that because a lot of people want to dig in. Those are for the armchair researcher style people, because there's a certain demographic of people that really wants to know every piece of research because they're skeptical.
Yep.
Well, we provide that. So there's a lot. Just go on our website. It's all there.
Great. And so between totally free, I imagine there are people who engage in your, I guess you wouldn't call it groups, but you have a presence on social media. So who engage with you there and who have read the book. I imagine there are people
Facebook groups.
who have reported to you that just the utter existence of the model has probably saved them from faulty thinking.
I think there's more people uh, that I know of. There's more people that get the book and move on with their life than there are that do the other services. The other services tend to be somebody that's read the book and then they go, oh, I get it intellectually. And this is the difference. There are people that can read a book, and whatever their circumstance is, they can read it intellectually and emotionally get it. Those two things have to converge for a true
Right.
understanding. But there are other people who watch a podcast, read the book, do all this stuff. They're getting it, but they're like, I need to talk to
But
somebody.
how does this apply to me? Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. You know that.
Yeah, for sure.
You get it. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
hey, man,
So
I
it's the same with,
appreciate so much. You said you weren't going to tell your story too, and I somehow drew that out of you. I appreciate
you
every bit of
did.
time you've given. I like people to know who you are. I think it's really cool what you guys do. There's something just incredible about the work that you do. I mean, you've really have given your life to doing this work, and it's for you, and it's also just so that you can benefit people in the masses, as many as you can. And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And we'll have to get onto a topic. I have my like Socratic way of talking. I remember like some amount of years ago we talked about MAT, and I sort of let you take it for a ride, and I played devil's advocate through the conversation. I'd like to get onto a topic that we know we agree on, and it's going to piss people off sometime. So we'll hold it for now. But just really, if you guys keep in touch, I'd love to do more outward facing conversations.
Well, let's do this. Let's put it out to the public. Give us a topic, a controversial topic, something that is incendiary, something that's really uncomfortable. Give it to us. And I promise I won't be a dick.
Yeah.
I've learned how not to punch people in the face and be a little more diplomatic about things. And Zach is always like super smart and diplomatic, and we obviously have good banter. So I I want to say this to the audience too, that Zach is always gracious and lets me talk because he is the Socratic master. He is. And I want to hear more from Zach.
Right.
On a
Do you do the fucking work, Zach? Yeah, I know. I know.
I want to hear. I want to hear your style more.
Yeah,
On a
yeah.
topic.
Well, I don't mind. There are times. I think my best writing too, Stanton has pointed out, or the best conversations we've had. And he'll say, "Well, are you recording?" Or when I'm pissed off, I start thinking, well, how can somebody not understand this, or how could somebody be so cruel, or have such a bias? And I should do that more. Now there is something useful about that. Not always playing the mediator.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to hear. So let's find something that you are that really maybe hurts you, something that hits your heart. You have to understand the AA thing. The reason I am that way is because I did put a gun in my mouth over it. I mean, that really happened,
Right.
So, it's 36 years later. I cry, when I think about it. So, I'd like to hear your story like that. Something that maybe not that ridiculous and outrageous, but yeah, something that matters to you.
Let me think on it. I know what does. Let me think on it. So that'll be good. So if people want to comment or just send us emails or whatever you want to do, call us, or no death threats, but to ask us, to discuss something that you find difficult to talk about in public. And I think neither of us mind doing it. It's not like I shy away from confrontation either. So that'll be great.
Sure.
And we can reverse the roles next time for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll take the coach's role this time.
Mark, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody who's listening. So it's an honor to be here.
Lamborghini here, my Lamborghini here.